So we left St. Louis and headed towards Dakar, which is the capital of Senegal. And we encountered for the first time on this trip the baobab trees, which are probably my favourite tree. They're just absolutely enormous, and apparently they live up to 2,500 years. They're just extraordinary trees, and in fact they can contain up to 120,000 litres of water, and that's how they're able to survive in these hot climates. And so anyway, the drive was very warm, but it was interesting, and we passed lots of small towns with primitive shops, but there's always something happening. It's action-packed because there's so many people. There's pockets of industrial areas where there's sort of repair shops, and it's a hive of activity. There's welding going on and all sorts of stuff. And we do attract a fair bit of attention, and there's often people waving as we go past. They all seem pretty friendly. We did see a goat being slaughtered on the side of the road at one stage, and I must admit that didn't go down too well with one or two of our passengers, but that's what happens here. So we got down as far as Dakar, and Amory and I chose to take a taxi and stay the night in Dakar. The campground we were at was a fair way away from the city. So everyone else stayed out at the campground, which is fine, out at the Pink Lakes. But we'd only been to Dakar once before, and it meant we had 2 days there really instead of one. So we thought we'd take advantage of that. And the first day we went off to the famous Gorée Island, where, according to our guide, 40 million slaves had their last experience in Africa before they were shipped off to mainly America, but also places like Brazil, Cuba, lots of Caribbean countries like Haiti, Dominica, I think, and that was the last they saw of Africa. And it's interesting, this the packed ferry terminal was evidence in itself just how popular this island is, and many tourists that are actually in some respects chasing their roots as to where their ancestors originally came from, because so many slaves left from this part of the world. It was interesting when we were here probably 15 years ago and had the same story. There was 20 million slaves that left. Now it's 40 million, so I guess inflation's hit hard during that time. But this is over a long period. It was nearly 400 years. They started, I think, in 1450, and the French, I think, abolished slavery in about 1850 or around about that time. There's the famous door, which is the last memory of Africa for the millions that were shipped against their will, and this door has been visited by presidents and popes, mainly as a symbolic salute for not taking freedom for granted. Anyway, we wandered around the island with our guide. There's still a community of probably 1,400 people that live on the island, and they're reliant, of course, on the mainland for provisions and even electricity. There's a cable that goes over the ocean. However, it is Senegal's biggest tourist attraction, and well worth a visit. And we saw local artists doing all sorts of things, including paintings made out of sand and sand from all parts of Africa in all sorts of different colours. It was quite interesting. After we left the island, we headed down to the fishing area, which again was just manic. There's boats coming in and people moving around, and this was one of the dirtier ones that we've been to, but there was a wide variety of fish, and I saw a couple of sea snails the size which I've never seen before, and they have a rock hard shell, and lots of baby octopus as well. And right next to the fishing market is the central market, which is really I guess a bit of a tourist area to some degree, and there's all sorts of the usual tourist paraphernalia. But what was interesting about this is that they even had places there where they were actually making the stuff that they were selling. There was a lot of wood carvings and a lot of a lot of guys working on wood. They use mainly teak and ebony, and ebony's not a common wood anymore. But it was good to see them working, and it's still very, very manual. Anyway, sadly we have a fair old collection of sort of wooden bits and pieces from various trips, and we don't collect them anymore. And one more hippo just didn't seem necessary. We got to ride in some of the worst taxis imaginable. I don't know how this still working, but doesn't seem to affect the price. Albeit in saying that, taxis here are pretty inexpensive. The next day we went and visited the Renaissance Monument in Dakar. It's an enormous copper statue built to commemorate the progress of Senegal, and what a bright future that it has. And there's a lift that actually goes up the 15 levels to the top, which you can take. And it really, there's a museum on 3 or 4 of the floors, and really just depicting the multinational and multicultural upbringing of Senegal. And we're not great museum people, but this wasn't bad. Anyway, later that afternoon we headed back to La Rosa Lake, where the campground was. And La Rosa Lake's known as the Pink Lake. Wasn't that pink while we were there, but I think that's reliant pretty much on a clear sky and a sunset or a sunrise. But it certainly does have a pink tinge to it due to its very high salinity. I think the lake itself is, I think they said 5 kilometres long by 1.5 kilometres wide, and it's no more than 1.5 metres deep at its deepest point. And so it's a similar salinity to the Dead Sea. Not that I'd swim in this one, to be honest, but they do actually mine the salt, and locals go out in boats and collect the salt that crystallises on the water. And the water temperature while we were there was probably 30, but it does get up to 35, 36 apparently, which is obviously pretty warm. We've now completed a month on our visit to West Africa, and I thought I'd just outline some of the things that have happened. We obviously got off to a bad start with the truck accident, and very sadly 2 of our fellow passengers died, Andrew and Ken, and that was a terrible thing to happen. But obviously we've got to move on. From there we went to we were in Iswara, I think, and a group of us, and this mad dog ran out and bit the Dutch guy, which left quite a mark and a lot of blood, and of course everyone's worried about rabies, but anyway, he seems to be okay, and it's healing up. We had a scorpion in our tent on one of the bush camps that we did. And I made the mistake of giving a bit of blast with the bug spray, and the thing went ballistic. Honestly, it was careering round the tent like it was possessed by Satan. It was one of the scariest things I've ever done with respect to, we just couldn't get out because we had a couple of zips and it was dark, and I dropped the torch. God. Anyway, we survived that, and unlike the scorpion. And then a few days ago we heard there's a coup d'etat, a military coup d'etat in Guinea-Bissau, and we're off to Guinea-Bissau in about 4 or 5 days, so I'm not quite sure what's going to happen there. But on the bright side, looks like the dog's going to be okay.